I must say right away, I do not consider myself a criminal, although formally what I do for my soul and for earnings is illegal. People like me are called black diggers. Armed with old maps and a metal detector, I periodically go on expeditions in search of treasures and other valuables. Unfortunately, it is not always possible to find something of any value, but one finds more than pays for all unsuccessful outings. Usually I have to travel far out of town, but recently I heard rumors. An old hospital for the mentally ill in my city was decided to be demolished in order to build a large housing estate in its place. Luck seemed to come into my hands by itself, because earlier in its buildings there was a military town in which White Guard troops were stationed during the Civil War. Who knows, maybe with my search experience I will be able to find the legendary Kolchak gold mysteriously missing somewhere in our region, or at least a couple of ingots from that treasury. Soon the rumors were confirmed. Patients were hurriedly transported to other clinics, and I was looking forward to my time. One of the orderlies of the closing medical facility agreed to become my secret informant, of course, for a modest fee. A week later, he called me and informed me that they were about to take out the last psycho and take him away. No one from the staff was left on the hospital grounds either. However, tomorrow the equipment will come here and start demolishing dilapidated buildings. I had only the next night left. But the orderly was also pleased with the good news, since the territory will be unattended for less than a day, and all the property of the hospital has already been taken out. They decided not to leave security at the facility. The path was absolutely clear. It didn't take me long to get ready. All the ammunition was ready for a long time. After waiting for dark, I jumped into my jeep and was there in 15 minutes. The expedition promised to be the easiest and fastest of all in my life, so it seemed to me at that time. The hospital was located on the outskirts. There were no residential buildings or administrative buildings nearby, so I had no one to hide from. Whistling, I calmly walked to a high-def fence, girdled with barbed wire from above. Such a barrier did not frighten me for a long time. Climbing the folding ladder, I bit the wire with tongs and instantly jumped over the fence. It was difficult to scare me, but once here, even I felt at least uncomfortable. 12.5 lifeless buildings of the now former psychiatric hospital looked at me with their windows. They were low brick buildings with narrow windows, many of which had bars on them. But most of all, the absolute silence was frightening. No people talking, no cars, no birds chirping, as if everything around had died out. Without thinking twice, I got down to business. The work front was considerable, and there were only 6 hours left before dawn. Moving from building to building, I became more and more disappointed. I could not find anything worthwhile either in the houses themselves or near them, except for a couple of copper coins of Tsarist times. However, I left the sweetest piece for last. I'm talking about a small squat house on the edge of the hospital grounds. According to the archival plan, this house, like the entire military camp, was built more than 100 years ago and was intended for the residence of the most senior officers. Perhaps even Admiral Kolchak himself visited it, which means that the chances of profiting from something increased many times. The only thing that alerted me a little was that not a single modern plan of the psychiatric hospital of this building was marked, as if it did not exist at all. I was even afraid at first that it had been demolished a long time ago, but now I saw it in front of me in all its glory. However, it was difficult to call it beauty. A small brick 2-story building turned black with time, and its first floor sank so deeply that it resembled a basement rather. But most of all the questions were caused by the fact that all the windows of this building were bricked up. However, it did not look abandoned. The road to it was cleared of foliage, and the front door looked the most expensive and sturdy of all that were here. It turned out to be very difficult to enter the house. The lock turned out to be no less reliable than the door itself. What the hell, this shack is going to be demolished one of these days anyway. They might not have locked it up. I grumbled to myself. But I'm not used to retreating. Although I had to puff, after 20 minutes I finally stepped inside this mysterious structure. A sharp chemical reserve hit the nose. Of course, I understood that various medical procedures were carried out in the hospital yesterday, but such a dense smell of medicines was felt only in this building. Inside, due to the lack of windows, there was absolute darkness. I immediately turned on the headlamp and looked around. The first floor was nothing special. Deserted offices, old furniture that they decided to give under the bucket along with the building, and the usual garbage left in a hurry by doctors. But what really caught my attention was the luxurious staircase in the center, which gave the shabby, in general, house the appearance of a small palace. She was clearly the same age as the entire building. Its steps led both up to the second floor and down to the deep basement. Realizing that it was underground, in the walls and floor of the basement, that the treasures I came for were most likely to be discovered, I decided to delay this intriguing moment and went upstairs. The staircase really has never been repaired in the last century, it seems, and therefore it creaked all over the neighborhood. Every step I took cut through the oppressive silence that still reigned around. Suddenly, simultaneously with the creaking, I heard some other sound. The creaking almost drowned it out, and yet I definitely heard something and was sure that the sound came from inside the building. I stopped and listened, but again everything was quiet. As I expected, the second floor wasn't anything impressive either. But as soon as I took a closer look at one of the offices, I changed my mind. There was a fairly large safe in the corner. Fixated on the search for antiquities, I somehow forgot that something very expensive could be stored in the hospital itself, for example, rare medicines that I could profitably drive on the black market. My joy was spoiled only by the thought that this heavy machine would have to be dragged to the car, because it would definitely not be possible to open it with improvised means. But the safe was unlocked. To my great disappointment, there was no money in the safe, no medicines, or anything else that could replenish my capital. All that was in it was a thick old folder, for some reason tied up for several turns with a thick fishing line. I decided to amuse my curiosity, since the pocket could not be amused, and cut the fishing line. On the folder was a faded handwritten inscription. Sigma patient. Well, let's see how this poor guy managed to get here, and what kind of Napoleon he imagined himself to be. I grinned, opening the folder. But there was nothing funny inside. I began to read the pages attached to the folder diagonally, and this is what I found out. 10 years ago, an unusual patient was admitted to this hospital. It was a boy of about 12 years old. It was not possible to find out his exact age, since he had no documents with him. He grew up in a family of alcoholics and hid in a doghouse from an early age from the beatings of his parents. As a result, he settled there with a shepherd dog who shared food with him and, in fact, raised him as a second mother. The child adopted all the habits of the animal. Ran on all fours, barked, growled. And when the guy got a little stronger, he bit his own parents with his teeth. That's when he got into this psychiatric clinic. From the ornate wording, I realized that officially the young patient, who had no relatives or relatives left, was not entered into any databases. This was done so that any doctors and scientists could test a variety of treatment methods on it. Of course, all this was done informally and secretly. Most of the pages described what experimental medications were administered to this poor guy and what effect they had on him. Carried away by this reading, I completely forgot about the time. After reading the folder to about the middle, I looked at my watch and gasped it would start to get light in 40 minutes, and I hadn't even gone down to the basement yet. I dropped the folder and wanted to run downstairs, but decided to take a last look at the most recent entry. It read, "The patient has completely lost his human appearance, both externally and internally. Verdict: leave in a special ward, stop giving food and water." I felt uneasy from what I had read, but things were not waiting for me. I urgently needed to finish what I had started. As I was descending, I heard something again, but this time much more clearly. It was something between a scream and a howl, and this time the sound came from outside, not far from the front door, which I left open. Probably a stray dog has wandered in, I decided on the move, realizing in my heart that dogs do not make such sounds. I ran into the basement and immediately started searching. There was no time for a preliminary inspection, although the darkness was even thicker here. Moving the metal detector along the walls, floor and ceiling, I seemed to hear something else behind its measured chirping in headphones. These sounds resembled the footsteps of bare human feet, although too frequent. Sometimes it seemed to me that they were running somewhere far away on the street, then on the second floor, then right above me. But the search excitement overshadowed any of my fears and suspicions, and where could a person come from, and even barefoot? All the patients were taken away, and no one but me would have dared to come here at night. And finally, I stumbled upon something. Looking closer, I saw that it was an ancient chain. Not the most valuable find, but, as they say, on Besraby. One end of the chain led to the basement wall and was nailed to an equally antique nail, the other to a shackle bracelet. I reasoned that in ancient times prisoners of war or guilty soldiers were kept on this chain. I bent down to get a better look at the chain, and then the light of the flashlight fell on something creepy and disgusting. Next to the chain, a severed finger lay in a pool of dried blood. It was a strange elongated shape, and yet it was definitely human. I didn't like that at all. After all, this is not a morgue or a surgical ward, where such pictures are probably in the order of things. Thinking that no Kolchak gold is worth such adventures, I decided to return to the car. I was already climbing the stairs, but curiosity and thirst for profit took their toll. I decided to devote just a few minutes to the second part of the basement, which I had not yet had time to visit. How I later regretted this decision. Searching the basement walls with my eyes, so as not to miss something valuable, I did not look at my feet at all. Suddenly my foot sank into something unpleasantly soft. I slowly lowered my head with the flashlight down, and barely restrained the urge to vomit. My foot got stuck in the entrails of a fresh corpse. His throat was torn open, his guts were out, as if some predator had been mocking the unfortunate for hours. Despite the disfigurement of the body, I recognized him as the same orderly whom I had recruited as my informant for several days. Forgetting about everything, I rushed to run, but when I turned around, I saw this in front of me. I was blocked by a creature I will never forget. His arms were of the same extraordinary length as his legs and rested on the floor with his palms. The skin was absolutely pale, the ears stretched out to the sides, bright purple bruises gaped under the eyes. In the eyes of this monster, instead of pupils and whites, there was some kind of bloody mess. And yet it saw me, or at least felt me. I could tell by how aggressively it was baring its rotten teeth. Despite all these terrifying features, I understood that a man was standing in front of me. Or at least what they once were. I tried to run to the side of this creature, but it immediately rushed in my direction. Protecting my face, I put out my hand, and the creature bit into it with incredible force. In an instant, his jaws crushed the bones in my forearm and tore out a large piece of meat from it. I screamed in wild pain, but the survival instinct gave me strength. I grabbed the metal detector lying nearby and hit the monster with it several times with all my might. He immediately jumped to the side, hugged his knees with his hands and squeezed himself into a corner, as if the pain was a kind of command for him. The way to salvation opened. I ran as fast as I could to the street and then to the part of the fence where the barbed wire was cut. Running out of the ill-fated building, I heard that the creature on its four limbs rushed after me and quickly caught up. And now, already climbing to the edge of the fence, I felt the freak bite me just as hard on the shin and pull me down. I was able to escape only by leaving another piece of my body in the mouth of my pursuer. I couldn't run anymore and crawled to the jeep on all fours. I realized with horror that if the creature climbed over the fence, and it could easily do that, I would face the same fate as the orderly in the basement. But when I turned around, I didn't see anyone. Apparently, it considered the territory outside the hospital forbidden to itself. I couldn't tell the doctors what really happened to me. I was afraid that in this case my dirty deeds would be revealed, for which I was threatened with a real prison term. Therefore, I came up with a story with a pack of stray dogs, from which I barely fought off. I managed to restore my leg, but I had to say goodbye to my arm. The wound turned out to be too deep. A few days later, after recovering from the shock, I tried to recreate in my head all the circumstances of what happened. Of course, I immediately realized that this unknown individual was a patient of Sigma. A difficult childhood, bullying in a mental hospital and numerous medical experiments finally killed everything human in that guy, leaving only the simplest instincts. It was decided to transport the Sigma patient last of all, and getting the creature out of the basement was the last task for my friend the orderly. But he did not know that in striving for freedom, the individual bit off his thumb and removed the chain on which he was chained. As soon as the door of the ward opened, the creature attacked the orderly, gnawed and gutted him. And the rest of the staff, seeing this, simply locked the door to the building and hurriedly retreated, hoping that the building during the demolition would bury what they had generated with their inhuman experiments.